Good evening, and thank you for joining us as we host the first Jewish Quarterly Global Conversation of 2024. I'm Debbie Lee, Festival Director, Melbourne Jewish Book Week. Before we commence, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which Melbourne Jewish Book Week is based, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Tonight, we have a highly topical conversation based on the latest issue of the Jewish Quarterly, entitled Dark Star, Elon Musk's Dangerous Turn. Walkley Award-winning journalist and foreign correspondent Richard Cooke has provided a startling analysis of the transformation of the world's richest man from self-described social moderate to neo-reactionary conservative, courting hate speech on his own online platform X, formerly known as Twitter. Richard has previously published Tired of Winning about Donald Trump, as well as a biography of Robin Davidson, the author of Tracks. His next book is on a cultural history of Wikipedia. Interviewing Richard tonight is Deborah Stone, journalist and editor-in-chief with +61J Media. Deborah was formerly the editor of the Australian Jewish News and a reporter with The Age and the Australian newspapers. In addition to the Jewish Quarterly, +61J Media and Melbourne Jewish Book Week, we are proud to partner with the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilization, as well as the Jewish Museum of Australia, in bringing you tonight's event. I'm delighted to now hand over to Richard and Deborah.
Thank you, Debbie. And welcome everybody, and good evening especially Richard. It's a privilege to be here to talk with you about a very interesting and very demanding essay, or something between a long essay and a short book. It's demanding to read, not because of its length, but because it forces the reader to confront some very disturbing realities about power, money, and technology in our times. I think we all know that Elon Musk is a very rich and a very powerful man, that he runs Tesla and SpaceX and most notoriously Twitter, or X as it's now supposed to be. What Musk has been doing both with and on that platform is a worry for anyone who cares about democracy, diversity, or accountability. And it's a particular worry for Jews because it's opened up a new and in some ways unprecedented platform for anti-Semitism. Musk used to feel like a sometimes eccentric but visionary tech billionaire with an impressive environmental agenda. Now he's a troll mogul who uses his power to support and spread racist and anti-Semitic conspiracies. How on earth did that happen? Richard, to set the scene, can you paint a picture of where Elon Musk seemed to stand socially and politically before Twitter, when his business interests were in electric cars and space exploration and artificial intelligence?
That's a great question. And if we look at how Elon Musk himself was behaving on Twitter only 4 or 5 years ago, he tended to be in his comments talking to civilians about rocket physics, sometimes in some fairly minute detail. He was then a self-described social liberal. He has at different times called himself a socialist, although not of the standard kind. He backed things like multilateral action on climate change. He had spoken out in favor of universal basic income. And he had, he said, only ever supported Democratic candidates in both local and federal elections in the United States. Around the same time, he was Times Person of the Year for his business interests and also for his ability to make the electric car a feasible reality in our lifetime. And that now, even though it was only a few short years ago, feels very, very distant.
Those interests, even without Twitter, did give Musk extraordinary, perhaps unprecedented power. One striking example of how he uses his power outside of Twitter specifically is his involvement in the Ukraine-Russian war. Can you tell us what happened when a Ukrainian minister asked publicly for him to provide Starlink satellite stations to help Ukrainian communications in the war?
So one of Musk's, I guess, adjunct businesses for anybody else, it would be the achievement of a lifetime, is that he has a satellite-based internet system called Starlink, which involves the launch of thousands of satellites, which means that, you know, the goal, and it's a nearly achieved goal of that business, is to make global access to high-speed broadband ubiquitous. Even in Australia, people in very remote areas are able to access ceaseless, very fast internet thanks to Starlink. And you can imagine in contemporary warfare, where people use drones, for example, that is extremely valuable. The battlefield is shaped by exactly this kind of internet, and when it's space-based, it can't be attacked as a form of infrastructure. So the Ukrainians pretty much publicly begged Musk to use this system in their war against Russia. He granted that request, and they then found that there were certain areas, especially when they were trying to take offensive action, for example, against the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. They had a fleet of submarine drones ready to attack some Russian warships, and they suddenly stopped working. And they realized that Elon Musk had done what is called geofencing the Starlink system, so that once they reached a certain physical area, geographical area, where he thought that that might risk escalation into possibly even nuclear war, the submarines just harmlessly washed up to shore. So you can see that this is an extraordinary, you can imagine what it's like being a Ukrainian general or officer planning an attack like this, and suddenly realizing that your battlefield has been shaped in advance by Elon Musk in a way which you find out about when your offensive failed.
It's quite extraordinary. Musk seems to have no qualms about making those kinds of decisions, as if he were king of the world, despite the fact that nobody ever elected him. But until 2022, he'd done it through technology. What was different when he got Twitter is that he picked up an established social media company, quite a different beast, and he started using that to make an impact. There was a particular incident that apparently prompted Musk to buy Twitter. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, there's kind of a succession of personal events, and it's difficult to give those a precise weighting. We know that these have weighed on Musk's mind, and they've helped change his mind about particular things. One of those is a daughter of his becoming trans and him sort of blaming the California school system for their estrangement. Another is some not very strategic treatment by the Biden administration, where they kept deliberately refusing to give him credit for electric cars. He took great personal umbrage about COVID restrictions, again in California, that affected his Tesla plants and other business interests. And his ex-wife, the actor Tallulah Riley, after a comedy account called the Babylon Bee was banned from Twitter, again over a trans issue, she suggested that he buy it to kind of overcome this atmosphere of political correctness. And it looks like with some stop-start motions in between, he took that advice.
So it seems almost as if that were a knee-jerk reaction, something unplanned. They just thought, okay, I don't like this, I can control it.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem to have acted impulsively, and one indicator of that is that he tried to back out of the deal. He tried to say that there were so many fake accounts on Twitter that valuation couldn't be correct. It couldn't be assured. Twitter took legal action, and they ended up effectively settling by him purchasing Twitter for an agreed price, and then turning it into a kind of free speech clearinghouse that he now says is a precondition for humanity becoming interplanetary.
So Musk's ownership of Twitter has been a notorious commercial failure. You write that his Twitter acquisition lost him 44 billion US in a year, but it was never a good commercial proposition. So why did Musk buy Twitter, do you think? What do you think he actually wanted to achieve in owning the platform?
I think that, yeah, I mean, we can put an asterisk next to that the Twitter story is not over. It's not uncommon for tech stocks to have these extraordinarily volatile ups and downs. We've seen the down, but that doesn't mean that there won't be an up. I think that he places a great emphasis on being a poster, on having a social media presence that is popular and cutting and funny. He has a background where science fiction humor and things like Monty Python are very highly prized. He seems to, for a man who can have pretty much any pleasure that he wants, he seems to prize the pleasure of having one of his jokes go viral more than just about anything else. So he had an opportunity to kind of become the main character of Twitter by purchasing it in the way that Donald Trump used to be the main character. And that seems to be worth a great deal to him, both financially and personally.
It's almost like a revenge of the nerds scenario.
Yeah. I mean, there are people who say that the one thing that Musk can't buy is people thinking that he's cool, people thinking that he's funny. And he seems to desperately want this affirmation from fans and from others.
There are a lot of psychological explanations about why Musk is like he is. You don't particularly subscribe to any of them. I get the feeling, but do you want to run through what some of them are and how you feel about them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk, which came out towards the end of last year. I mean, people might be familiar with his work on Steve Jobs, and these are kind of biographies in a way. And he puts a lot of emphasis on familial relations, especially fathers, especially a father who is absent or can't be impressed. Can't give sort of comprehensive love to a child who deserves it. So Isaacson's explanation really harps on that, that Musk suffered an emotionally traumatic childhood from an unusually abusive father. I think that's uncontroversial. His father seems to be a terrible person. He was very severely bullied. Most tech nerds suffer bullying of some kind, but his was a particularly virulent grade growing up in South Africa. And yeah, Isaacson sort of says that this is his opportunity to not just be the bully, but to buy the playground. It's a sort of role reversal. And people have noted that when Musk is dressing people down, for example, and he tends to do that in a very aggressive way, he does use words and phrases that his father used on him when he was growing up. So it's not that the psychological explanation is wrong necessarily. I just don't think it's sufficient, that we can't go back and sort of look at the world's richest man and say, this is all just because he had a tough childhood. This is about a time and a place as much as a person.
And so you think that it is the context into which he has grown that has enabled him to be who he is. And part of that context is the world of the tech billionaire.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in a way, we're going through a new Gilded Age, where people like Musk fulfill the kind of role that people like Joseph Frick or Carnegie did a century before. But they have a very different, all sort of robber barons, or most robber barons, have to give some sort of social explanation for what they're doing. And those people did it by, building Carnegie Hall. Musk is a bit different, where he says that his business is the philanthropy ultimately, that all of his actions are philanthropic, all of them are to assure human flourishing now and in the future. So that's quite distinct.
So this human flourishing he's talking about is linked to his ideas about environment and about the need for space exploration. Can you tell us what his thinking is around that?
Yeah. So this is kind of characteristic, not just of him, but of Silicon Valley more generally. And it's linked to a movement, sometimes called long-termism, also called effective altruism, where these people are thinking about not just about how are humans doing now, but how are they going to be doing in 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years? Not just thinking about the human population now, but the potential human population of billions or even trillions eons into the future. And that gives a very different kind of character of empathy, if you like. It can remove empathy from the people that you see right in front of you to empathy, which is double or triple hypotheticals about prospective future humans who may never exist. So his ideas are often around existential threats. Climate change might be one, but the Earth succumbing to, accidental launch of nuclear weapons might be another. So both of those sorts of risks and others mean that he believes that we need to be living somewhere else as well, even just as an insurance policy.
So it's an almost messianic view where he's going to save the world by setting up this alternative Earth, and that therefore he is entitled to do whatever he wants, treat people however he wants, because he's in the process of saving the world.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. And Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, has joked that Elon Musk wants to save the world, but only if he can be the one to do it.
Great line. So what's going on there? That's just pure arrogance?
Yeah, and I mean, look, it seems to be sincere. It is part of this kind of internal debate within Silicon Valley about what its purpose is. And I think that some of that might come from guilt almost. When you do go to California, when you do go to San Francisco in particular, it's this kind of one of the characteristics of sci-fi dystopias is that they have all of the technology and all of the old problems. So San Francisco is now a city where driverless cars go past homeless encampments. And in a sense, that's not what we were promised. So part of the drive behind effective altruism is to say, those homeless people you see are not actually important. And ultimately that driverless car is heading towards a future in which many more millions of humans will flourish. I think that's a hard sell, personally.
It sounds awfully like self-justification for people who want to stay rich and privileged.
Yeah, I mean, one of the rationales behind effective altruism and the people who practiced it was that they should earn as much money as they possibly could, that then towards the end of their career, they could go and spend on mosquito nets to stop malaria spreading. So, every dollar they earned was prospectively a person saved from malaria, which is very convenient.
Yeah, and meanwhile, a certain amount of it gets spent on luxury living, rather a lot of it. Your essay introduced me to a new term, the term TESCREAL, which has been called the religion of tech billionaires. And I think we need to understand TESCREAL to understand this context in which Elon Musk is living. So tell us about it. What does it stand for? What does it mean?
Yeah, that's right. So TESCREAL, it's a bit of a wordy kind of acronym. It stands for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. And I won't go into each of those because it gets quite involved. But if you were going to simplify it, it's to do with the boundaries of humanity. It's to do with the fact that we live on a finite planet with finite resources. It's to do with the fact that we die. It's to do with the fact that our memory is not unlimited, or, we don't have the strength to pick up a car with our bare hands, for example. And TESCREAL, in a way, radically imagines possibilities around all those limitations. So one curious kind of anomaly about Musk among his peers is that he's okay with dying. He has said publicly that he doesn't particularly want to be immortal, which sounds kind of, bog standard human viewpoint, except many of his peers in Silicon Valley do want to be immortal and believe that that is a possibility, perhaps even a likelihood in their lifetime. Or if they can't be immortal, they might live for decades longer than an average human would now. And they're taking, steps to try and make sure that that's happening.
So these TESCREAL believers have got this idea, which is very much based around a rational, tech-oriented, highly optimistic view of this world they are creating, almost a sort of a messianic vision, but it's a scientific and technological messianic vision. And it certainly doesn't seem to have much place for poor people or social justice or the values of the centre left.
Yeah, look, I think that it is complex, and there's a variety of beliefs that overlap with TESCREAL. So, Elon Musk is actually more concerned with poor people than a lot of his peers. Again, he's spoken about stuff like universal basic income. He's climbed down on part of that, but previously he would just say outright, look, we're looking at a future where machines can do a lot of drudgery. They can do a lot of manual labor. There's no reason that people should be compelled to do it just because they have to do some sort of work. Realistically, there should be enough profit to pay all of those people to live at a minimum standard. That's an old idea, but it's still, a controversial idea everywhere, including in Silicon Valley. So he does have those sorts of considerations, but more and more, it looks like he's blaming things like the problem of homelessness or crime or disorder in San Francisco on diversity rather than inequality.
So blaming it on diversity, meaning that he doesn't like certain kinds of people.
Yeah, he seems to be very exercised by the number of migrants coming through the southern border. Obviously, he's not the only one, but that is a change for him, that he's looking at these kinds of places and blaming social liberals for being insufficiently tough on crime, for example, for these outcomes and conditions.
So libertarianism is another factor here, and libertarianism isn't technically a part of TESCREAL, but it seems to go along with it, the idea that there should be few or no limits on speech. Is that something Musk subscribes to?
Yeah, there are libertarian aspects of his thinking. And you can also sense some traces of what's called the California ideology in his ideas as well. Things that came out of computing and hacking. Silicon Valley has always had surprisingly indistinct politics. It's very socially liberal, but it does have this libertarian streak, and also a kind of slightly hypocritical want or need to take large amounts of government funding through what is effectively industrial policy, through defense or security concerns. A lot of government money has flowed into these tech firms. So it's always been a bit of a mishmash. But he is, you could describe him as a First Amendment extremist. He is someone who places a great amount of emphasis on unfettered free speech, and had said that when he took over Twitter, that its moderation policy would effectively become the legal restriction on speech in the United States. The moderation policy would be or would become the First Amendment.
And that pretty much happened. He let back onto Twitter a whole lot of conspiracy theorists and neo-Nazis who'd previously been excluded. And he's also agreed with some of the things they said and done a lot to amplify their voices. Can you give us some examples of some of those most problematic statements and associations?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's troubling, right? You know, there is a kind of historical understanding of the First Amendment, which looks at neo-Nazis in particular as a limit case. You know, so the ACLU has in the past represented neo-Nazis, in fact have had Jewish lawyers represent neo-Nazis to allow them to march. You know, it's a famous case where they marched in Skokie, Illinois, and the ACLU supported that to great controversy. But they felt that the First Amendment had to protect unpleasant speech or it was meaningless. But the ACLU, they didn't put out press releases saying that actually they agreed with the Nazis or go and have a beer with them after them. You know, this is a matter of principle. And there's the famous Voltaire quote or supposed Voltaire quote that I might disagree with what you say, but I will fight for your right to say it. And with Musk, you kind of don't sense that he really does disagree, that he does seem to consort with these people. And there's many, many examples of it. There was, in fact, another example just yesterday where he was sort of having conversations with someone who has posted videos of Hitler saying you should listen to this person and he's not who people say he is. And if that was a one-off, it might look like a mistake. But that is something which has happened with increasing regularity throughout the time that Musk has been in charge of Twitter, or now X. So most famously, you know, two of the most egregious examples, he agreed with and supported a campaign to attack the Anti-Defamation League. The architect of that campaign was an Irish neo-Nazi, a white nationalist and self-described raging anti-Semite called Keith Woods. He was rebuked by the White House, ultimately, not by name, but certainly him, for writing again at the end, the tail end of a thread talking about how Hitler was right. Someone put up a post saying that, you know, Jews supported attacks on white Western society, and he said that they had spoken the absolute truth. So you can imagine these sort of radioactive views, you know, things which would have been really career-ending or involve public disgrace, irretrievable public disgrace, not very long ago, are now just part and parcel of the activities of the richest man in the world. It's quite a turnaround.
And have we got any way of knowing why Musk is doing this? Does he believe it, or is it some form of trolling?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's not very important whether he believes it or not. This is Christmas for these guys. You know, this is a dream scenario. People like Nick Fuentes and Andrew Torba, some of the most prominent white nationalists in the world, are quite open about how beneficial this has been to their movement and to their talking points. You know, they've spoken about how not very long ago they were effectively frozen out of these platforms, and they have now not only been invited back, but have got the red carpet treatment. So what my essay tries to do is do careful, historically informed speculation about how we've wound up here. There's, you know, Musk says that he's not an anti-Semite, that it's all a big misunderstanding. You know, he's gone on a fairly heavily choreographed trip to Auschwitz to say how much he loves Jews, and has then, you know, sometimes hours or days later after events like this, gone back to agreeing with people who either don't think the Holocaust happened or would like to see another one.
You've described him as a troll tycoon, which I think is a fabulous phrase, but you also, in doing that, explain about the origin of the word troll, which I, for one, didn't know, and how it relates to what Musk does. Can you tell us about trolling and where Musk fits into that whole concept?
Yeah, so I do think trolling, and I haven't done I think a fabulous job of understanding it. I think trolling is a much more important cultural phenomenon um, than it first appears. I think Trump, the rise of Donald Trump is not really, it can't really be passed without understanding him as the first internet troll president. So the term troll or trolling comes from fishing. It's not a, Norwegian troll under a bridge in a fairy story. It comes from dragging a lure behind a boat, and waiting for bites that way. So the idea is kind of provocation. It's probably deception as well. You're using a lure which looks like a fish. It's going to be bitten in a case of mistaken identity or out of curiosity or anger. So what you see in trolling is constant iterations of one thing which could be another thing as well. It's kind of an in joke and an out joke at the same time. So, Musk has gotten into trouble before for doing what's really veiled forms of stock pumping or even insider trading, where, he has tweeted particular emojis, which people know means that he's thinking about investing in a cryptocurrency called Dogecoin. And he has a big enough following on social media that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, that Dogecoin goes up and people who watch Musk and listen to him and act based on what he's doing make money from that. And that affirms this very already strong fan base that feels like he's a kind of man against the system on the people's side.
So it's all about power and gaining a following rather than about believing something.
Yeah, I mean, you can believe it as well, but if we're trying to understand these attitudes in a kind of classical historical sense, here is someone who has a concrete belief. It's largely unchanging. It expresses itself in predictable ways. That is quite distinct from how a posture is driven by social media algorithms, how something is affirmed, how many people agree with you at a particular time, what kinds of people those are. So you end up with this almost quantum state where you can believe something and not believe something at the same time, depending on who's asking. And what drives that is attention. Anti-Semitism is still almost a guaranteed way to get attention. And this has been the case for a while. If you look at, say, David Irving, the so-called revisionist historian, he asked for a copy of Mein Kampf as a school prize when he was still studying history in high school. And his brother said that sort of the controversy and the look on his face when he got up to receive that prize really set the course of his entire future career. That it gave him this sort of attention and this provocative attention that became incredibly addictive for him. And that is addictive for other people, and nothing furnishes that addiction like social media.
And this also explains why it is so difficult for those of us who perhaps come from a different era or are perhaps just driven by a different kind of thinking, but who are tied to the concept that you believe something and you stick to it through thick and thin, and your statements should be consistent with one another and your beliefs should hang together in a consistent tapestry, that we struggle so hard to work out what a Trump or a Musk is thinking, because we're trying to find a thought pattern and there isn't one.
Yeah, that it's really a set of incentives. And even contradicting it, even arguing against it, even insulting someone or contradicting them, cannot run counter to those incentives, but instead run into them.
And there are no countervailing ethics. There is nothing that says, something is beyond the pale.
No, I mean, once you have this kind of moral freefall, there isn't. And I don't think it's a coincidence that if you look at the things that Musk hates more than anything, if you look at the things he reserves his ire for, and then he turns his fan base on, it's the things which can still provide these forms of accountability. Some of it's obvious, the media is one possibility. Things like the Anti-Defamation League are another. But even Wikipedia, which can still say, Elon Musk endorses these conspiracy theories, it is something that he doesn't want to have making that record known. He doesn't want that version of events, and he can just turn his fan base on people to the point where they might have to move house or put armed guards outside their place of work or worship.
Does the guy have no external moral compass?
Well, I think he does have an external moral compass. But when your moral compass involves humans living thousands of years in the future that you think you are responsible for, I mean, we see this even in his own family, that he has this natalist belief that he is responsible for making as much, human material into the future as possible.
That's why he has 11 children.
That's right. And it is one possibility about why he was so angered by one of his children becoming trans. Not just that they were trans, but he sort of thought of that as an opportunity cost of an untold number of heirs and grandchildren, or great-great-great-grandchildren. So when you have that attitude, whether someone's an anti-Semite in the here and now, is not very important. If they can help you, and they can help you in a way which is aggressive, in a way which is hard to counteract, then the ends, even very deep into the future, justify that means.
So in that sense, he's a very different kind of anti-Semite from the kind of anti-Semitism that we're used to, where anti-Semitism has this history which was, is based on xenophobia, or it's based on religious beliefs, or it's based on racial eugenics beliefs. But they are all systems of beliefs that for some reason choose to exclude Jews, usually because Jews are a historical and convenient outsider figure. In this case, I guess, again, that Jews are a historical and convenient outsider figure because they can draw attention.
Yeah, look, I think that there's always been, Theodore Adorno, for example, wrote about how aspects of anti-Semitism were obviously contradictory on their own terms, and that wasn't an impediment for people believing them. And I think that if you look at the Jews that, the Jewish people that Elon Musk has attacked, George Soros is one of them. George Soros sold off very large volumes of Tesla stock in a way that angered Elon Musk very greatly. Not just angered him because it harmed him financially, but because he thought it harmed the drive away from fossil fuels. So, it's not just like it's a hit to the pocketbook or the share price. It's potentially, in his mind, an existential threat to humanity. Now, if people attack George Soros, and some of the people who do that are anti-Semites, the anti-Semitism for Musk is not a reason not to endorse those attacks. And if those attacks hit harder because of that anti-Semitism, then that has a utility to him that he is unable to overlook.
And that perhaps also explains this rather odd and complex relationship with the ADL, which seems to be, well, I found it's quite difficult to follow his relationship with Jonathan Greenblatt. Can you tell me what's going on between Musk and the US's primary organization for fighting anti-Semitism?
I wish I could. I can pinpoint some of the aspects of it. And look, I think ultimately, so Jonathan Greenblatt, among others, because Musk had this history of, essentially saying, look, it's going to be a free for all, where all these people will be invited back. They and others had concerns saying, okay, we know that hate speech is directly responsible for acts of violence. We are going to, in some cases, speak to advertisers. In others, just say, we think this is a bad idea, but we're going to wait. Now, there was a sort of détente where members of the ADL met with the CEO of Twitter to talk about what moderation might look like. Neo-Nazis who were parents realized that this might be a time when they would lose their access privileges, where they might be booted off again. And so they organized a campaign against the ADL, saying that it should be banned either from Twitter or outright, or sued for defamation. And they were able to get Musk to endorse that campaign publicly. That involved, that was enough of a threat environment for the ADL that they had to post armed guards outside the organization's headquarters. But they seem to have decided that Musk was too big to fail, that he was too dangerous as an adversary, that he was too powerful, that if they tried to harm him or contain him, he could do much worse to them. So they opened up this kind of diplomatic channel where they would do things like, so that they were going to advertise on Twitter. They in fact did advertise on Twitter after they banned the ADL hashtag. And that's when these kind of apology tours, Musk rather met with Benjamin Netanyahu. He met with Ben Shapiro and other sort of leading conservative right-wing Jews to say, I love Jews. I don't know why anyone would think that I'm an anti-Semite. The unspoken part being just because I hop on board campaigns, which I know have been organized by some of the most prominent anti-Semites in the world.
So the ADL is apparently doing some kind of appeasement strategy because it can't afford to alienate Musk.
It certainly seems that way, and they have priorities of their own, which they seem to think they can get Musk on board with. So for the Netanyahu government, an obvious one is that they don't want Starlink to be used on the Gaza Strip. So they think if they kind of pal around with Musk, they can extract that concession from him. There are particular similar ideas that seem to be driving the ADL, that they might be prioritizing those same kind of considerations over what we would classically understand as pretty cut and dried anti-Semitism.
So along with this, there's the fact that Musk has banned recently the terms of from the river to the sea and genocide.
That looks like it might be a flow-on effect, for example. Right. That might be that sort of staying in contact with Musk on these sorts of issues might be a way to make those concessions and look the other way on the rest.
And why does Musk even bother to make these concessions? I mean, he's a hell of a lot more powerful than the ADL or the Israeli government for that matter. Why does he even, bother? Does he care if people think he's an anti-Semite?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to. I think that it affects him professionally and personally if people do. And he may genuinely believe that he is not. and that just because you endorse things that neo-Nazis say doesn't make you an anti-Semite either. I mean, that is not generally, if you want to go to a free speech advocate, you don't tend to start with a neo-Nazi for obvious reasons. That's
the ACL did. Well, not start with, but the ACL used it as a test case. So
yeah, but that was as a matter of principle, rather than using the neo-Nazis as the mouthpiece. You know, they weren't endorsing their views. They weren't, you know, it was the ACLU putting out press releases, not the neo-Nazis, you know, not the neo-Nazis putting out a press release and then the ACLU saying, of course we agree with you. You know, double exclamation mark, true, this is the absolute truth, interesting, all the other things that Musk tacks on to what are sometimes very, very small Twitter accounts that do not stay very small once he has paid attention to them.
Does he treat any other group the way he treats Jews?
Well, one of the other sort of strains of his activity, and something which is absolutely unmissable if you are still on X, is stuff around race and IQ and race and crime. So, I mean, I don't know if this is the case for other people, but certainly if I go to what is called the For You tab on X, you know, here are some recommendations of people you might like to look at, you might like to follow, some tweets you might like to see. It's very often stuff about African Americans committing disproportionate amounts of crime. I mean, it is a relentless amount of stuff about that. And that has been a stock standard, ubiquitous form of news that white nationalists have specialized in. And it seems to be that something that Musk takes an interest in, which when combined with his other interests, points to a particular mindset and understanding of the world that we all know.
And recognize as white supremacism, recognize it as an existing and not at all new or future thinking way of approaching the world.
Well, that's right. And, you know, in a funny way, I finished writing the essay agreeing with at least part of what Elon Musk says about the importance of going to Mars. That it looks as though we may see people on Mars in our lifetime, and that Elon Musk will be integral to that effort. And that is a fresh opportunity, and that is a new start. And the public funding, the vast public funding for what's called the Artemis program, which will first head to the moon and then possibly to Mars, part of that is diversity driven. Part of that is saying, okay, we're going to have a woman on the moon. We're going to have a person of color on the moon. There will be the people in the first lander to redress this historical imbalance that we've only sent white men to the moon. And the person who is overseeing this effort, the private citizen who is overseeing this effort, just has open and complete contempt for that. You know, his disdain for it, his hatred for it, is one of the defining characteristics of his modern day persona, his new persona. And I think the more you look at that, the more and more incompatible it seems. And the more and more you realize once Elon Musk is on the moon or on Mars, there's not very much that other people can do about it.
So what you're saying is that Musk is in a position to blow up the ideological thrust of a diverse expansionist view. Our next colonialism, our space colonialism, could in fact not have the diversity which governments are saying it will?
Look, I think it's even more fundamental than that. That part of where modern democracies are, or are ostensibly, is to try and learn from the errors of colonialism and racial hatred, to make sure that it's not space colonialism, to make sure that it's not a kind of frontier mentality, and with everything that entails. And it seems to be happening right at the moment, where the key people are either forgetting or deliberately repudiating all of those historical lessons. I mean, you can't have a greater existential threat to real humans in the here and now than racial hatred. All the stuff about, what if AI goes haywire, that feels very, very pie in the sky compared to what we know racial hatred plus technology plus nationalism can do.
And this perhaps is the fundamental difference between people like us and people like Musk. The people who are worried about the society we have now, and the people who are prepared to absolutely bulldoze those problems for some future they imagine.
There's a kind of counter argument to effective altruism, which is called the Armani suit example. And the example that this philosopher gave was, imagine that you are wearing, and the question that he asked effective altruists, he said, imagine you're wearing an Armani suit and you walk past a child who is drowning, and the only way that you can save them is by jumping in and ruining that suit. Should the effective altruist keep walking because they can sell the unruined suit and raise enough money to save the life of more than one child in Africa from malaria? That's the kind of mindset at its extremity that effective altruism produces. And some effective altruists have been honest enough to say, yes, they should keep on walking. You can see, when you combine that mindset with the future of humanity in space, how dangerous it can be.
You've painted a very dismal picture, Richard. It's powerful, and it's about extraordinary power. We've got someone who is at best erratic, at worst incredibly hateful and incredibly arrogant about his belief in his understanding of how the world is and should be. Do you have any strategies or messages of hope in relation to this world where Elon Musk has so much power?
The future has always been driven by assholes. They put an application into it that normal people can't. So in some ways, we may have already had the benefits of the worst of Elon Musk. They resulted in the electric car. They resulted in Starlink. And it might be that this later stage, the figure of the eccentric billionaire who goes off the rails is also very familiar to us. Henry Ford is a famous example who also sort of succumbed to anti-Semitism. So it may be, if we apply the same sort of crudely cynical utilitarian mindset that Elon Musk has, maybe he will be beneficial in the end. Maybe all of this stuff compared to moving away from fossil fuels will ultimately be in the credit column. But I would like to think, and I would like to hope, that ultimately Elon Musk decides, why not have both? Why not? And this is what is particularly hard to understand, and what has made some people say that, Elon Musk must be on drugs or must be having psychiatric problems, is that if he just ran Tesla and SpaceX, and didn't pal around with neo-Nazis, he would be maybe not universally beloved, but certainly very widely respected. So I would like to think that maybe not contrition, but that will become ultimately irresistible for him in some way. That it's just too hard to go on like this.
Well, it's good to end with a fragment of hope in there. And it's certainly good to have the insight that you have brought to a topic which is disturbing but incredibly important to all of us. And I thank you very much for your time and your insight. I have two recommendations for those who are interested in these issues. The first is to make sure you take the time to read Richard's essay, Dark Star, Elon Musk's Dangerous Turn, in the Jewish Quarterly. It really is worth reading. And the second is to make sure that you stay informed and engaged on this and other major issues by subscribing to the free weekly online bulletins that we produce at +61J Media. Go to our website and enter your email address. Thank you to the Melbourne Jewish Book Week for hosting this event. Thank you, Richard, for your time and insight. And thank you to us, all of you, for joining us tonight. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Deborah. You've done my job for me. You've wrapped up beautifully. Richard, that was sensational. I am absolutely terrified of what I see as a mass indoctrination that's empowered by this social media platforming of hate speech that is honestly overtaking society. And from what you've discussed, I hope some of those euphemistic terms, such as effective altruism and long-termism, things that I hadn't heard of before, I hope that the positive attributes of the actual verbiage might shine through eventually instead of just this sort of power mongering. But that's enough from me. I'm really thrilled to have had this to have participated behind the scenes and let the two of you take the stage. It's been remarkable. Really appreciate it. And with that, I think we should bid adieu to our interested audience, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of conversation following on from this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.